Please welcome to the stage today's MC, founder of the Sawyer Group, Johnny Sawyer.
So good morning, and welcome to the final days of this year's GEOINT Symposium. I am Johnny Sawyer, and it is my pleasure to serve as your program host for today. You know, I know for many of you, today is going to be quite difficult learning of Patty's passing, But I would hope that you would join me in celebrating a life well lived. Patty was an advocate for innovation, inclusivity, and the environment. And so today's program, which touches on those themes, is dedicated to her. You know, the GEOINT Symposium is a unique place and a unique gathering that gives us the opportunity to meet, learn, and grow together. As I reflect on the 2 decades of USGIF, I am particularly impressed by two significant areas of growth: innovation and inclusivity. Again, things that Patty was known for. So as I look back on the over I apologize this morning. It's a bit broken up on Patty, so let me start again, please. So as I look back on my days as an all-source analyst in the early 2000s, it is remarkable the strides that we've made in GEOINT. From the traditional GEOINT 2s, such as the light table that we mentioned often throughout this symposium, to cutting-edge tech capabilities in AI, ML, and cloud computing. We've drastically and dramatically enhanced our operational speed and security. But make no mistake, GEOINT was crucial to informing policymakers and saving the lives of warfighters on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan. However, innovative technologies like quantum computing, AI models, are setting the stage for future breakthroughs that promise to redefine our field. You know, this relentless push for innovation has always been fueled by our community's passion and energy. And I encourage each of you to continue to contribute to the momentum through USGIF's working groups and events throughout the year. Turning to inclusivity, my career path from an aspiring to leadership roles without seeing others that looked like me, to becoming both the first African-American director for analysis and chief of staff at DIA, reflects the broader changes that we're seeing in our community. Today, we celebrate diversity in our leadership and throughout our ranks. And it's represented by our keynote speaker on Monday, Stacey Dixon, who with Averill Haynes formed the first woman-led D&I leadership team. And our own Tanya Wilkerson, Deputy Director of NGA, who was recently nominated by the President for the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security.
Yes.
All right. These days, when I spend time with the GEOINT community, thanks to leaders like Tish Long, Sue Gordon, Robert Cardillo, and Bob Sharp, I can connect with a much more diverse range of people, from neuro and gender diverse to people who have differing physical abilities. This inclusivity not only enriches our community, but drives the innovation that we celebrate today. Just yesterday, I had a heartening conversation with students and faculty from minority-serving institutions and the Golden Ticket winners. Sharing our journeys and seeing the potential reinforces my belief in the importance of diversity for the future of GEOINT. You know, Patty had a superpower, and that was she could see the future and the hopes and aspiration of our young folks. This week we've had an exhilarating program. Today's program, although shorter, promises to be equally enriching with outstanding speakers and sessions lined up for you today. Yesterday, we covered a lot of ground. Our first keynote speaker was Linnea Jones, who discussed the great partnership between the ICCIOs and the need to improve the ATO process and the need for diverse talent to ensure continuation of her agency's high standards and innovation. Her address was followed by a panel on space warfare and GEOINT with senior officials from DOD, NRO, and industry. They considered how a potential conflict in space could affect warfighters and international partners on the ground, at sea, and in the air. And they explored the pivotal role that GEOINT plays in tracking threats and enabling dynamic space operations to safeguard our warfighters and national security interests. Our second keynote of the day was from Scott Bray, Assistant Secretary General for Intelligence and Security at NATO, who offered his perspective on how NATO is approaching the integration of GEOINT for interdomain application across the NATO enterprise. The morning session concluded on the main stage with a panel called Geospatial Intelligence as a Team Sport. Geospatial intelligence has always been a team sport, right? And the panelists explored the potential and challenges of democratizing the tradecraft by empowering non-traditional users in a variety of fields to leverage geospatial data and derive insights without extensive training. That is the future of GEOINT. Now, I am excited to introduce our first speaker, my friend John Sherman, the Chief Information Officer for the United States Department of Defense. John has a broad perspective on information technologies and needs across the DoD and IC. Before joining the department, Mr. Sherman served as the United States Intelligence Community's CIO. In this position, he drove IT modernization amongst the 17 agencies and is a plank holder of the Mars program. His prior assignments include Deputy Director of the CIA's Open Source Enterprise, Principal Deputy National Intelligence Officer for Military Issues, and several senior executive positions at NGA. Mr. Sherman began his IC career in 1997 as an imagery analyst. Please join me in warmly welcoming the Honorable John Sherman.
Good morning. So how can you go better than starting with George Strait in the morning here, Amarillo by morning. Good morning, GEOINT Symposium. It is such an honor to be here with you this morning. As I always say, I feel like I'm home when I'm here. My roots are in GEOINT, and although I work in information technology, cybersecurity, and C3, coming to this symposium every year is one of the finest things I have a chance to do. So, what are we going to talk about today here? When I talked to you all at the last GEOINT Symposium last year, I talked about how GEOINT can be a driver of what we're doing in the DOD CIO realm. I'm going to talk a little bit different today on this. And I believe things happen for a reason. And when we parked out in the parking lot, I walked in with one of my longtime colleagues, Colonel Retired Remzo Martinez. And he actually asked me a question, which is the thesis for what I'm going to talk about today. He said, John, how did you go from being a GEOINTer to being the DOD CIO? And I said, Remzo, this is exactly what I plan to talk about today. So I'm going to talk about what my roots at NGA and the GEOINT community, how that served me to being where I am now in the DOD CIO realm here. Now, the picture you see before you here, a lot of you may be familiar with this. On the left-hand side, that's Corona, one of the earlier GEOINT collection platforms. The upper right-hand corner is an Army Gunsmoke satellite from a few years ago, launching small sats. And then on the lower right, you see what the NASA constellation looks like now. We live in a very changed community. Things are evolving, and I think professionally, we all need to be able to evolve and change. So on that note, as we have evolved in the GEOINT realm, so a little bit about my background. I did start as an imagery analyst. I did look at a light table with hard copy imagery. Now that's a picture of a sailor on the USS George Washington on a light table, not exactly like the ones we had at Building 213, but kind of similar to that. He's in 1996. You also see the camera from the U-2 there, and one of my favorites, the IDEX machine there at Udvar Hazy Museum. My kids are grown now and married, but when they were younger, I would bring them there and said, I probably put hands on that exact machine. I don't know if it's from ADF East or 213 or Langley, but by goodness, I'm pretty sure I waited in line to pull up imagery on there. And then our old favorite platform, the U-2. One of the greatest things I ever had a chance to do at Building 213 was waiting on those U-2 missions to come in down on the loading dock and going down there with some of my colleagues that are here amongst us today, getting that hand cart and bringing that load of U-2 film to exploit. And what a better way, no better way to spend an afternoon there. But what it taught me, though, I was also one of the ones that initially wasn't too hip on going to soft copy only. I was one of the ones almost physically hanging on my light table as it was being wheeled away at Building 213 there. But it provided me a key example of what change is needed and how to think digitally. And I believe Robert and others talked about this earlier this week, about how we must evolve. So what did it do for me in my current job? We're constantly evolving in DOD CIO. And one area I want to talk about just briefly is on cybersecurity. We've had many different iterations of cybersecurity over the years. At the perimeter, at the endpoint, defense in depth, and now we're all in on zero trust. Most of you are familiar, or many of you might be familiar with zero trust. Looking at how we prevent an enemy from moving laterally across our network. Trust no one and nothing. Identity Credential Access Management, ICAM, is critical in this. And we have committed by FY27 to having zero trust implemented on our unclassified NIPR and secret SIPR networks all across the DoD enterprise. This is a tall goal. Some in industry took 10 years to get to what we're trying to do in just a few years, and we're learning from industry on this. And we're moving out. Now, one thing my bosses, Secretary Austin and Deputy Secretary Hicks, have given us, we need to see if we can even pull that to the left. And we are working to do so on how we can get capabilities deployed sooner, because the threat isn't standing still. And I think back to my days, going from light table to soft copy, that same uncomfortable urge to move forward, and that's exactly what we're doing on cybersecurity with zero trust. Also, with defense industrial base cybersecurity, 400,000, give or take, companies in the U.S. defense industrial base. We have recently signed out guidance, I did, earlier this year in April, just last month, expanding some of the cybersecurity services from places like NSA and the Defense Cyber Crime Center to provide additional services to the defense industrial base. Because I tell you this, and many of you have heard me talk about this before, I'm not one to just throw requirements over the transom to the defense industrial base, particularly to small and medium-sized companies who are the root of our economy in the United States. Look, for the big primes, we want you to be successful too, but you've got the staffing, you've got the technology to do it. I'm worried about the 10-person company in Arlington, Texas. I'm worried about the 50-person company in St. Louis, Missouri. I can go down the list here. I want to make sure we're providing them tools and capabilities to participate in what we call the DIV cybersecurity program. Another big area on this is the Cyber Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC. I know we've talked a lot about this, and we are working to get this implemented as soon as we can. CMMC involves implementation of NIST 800-171 controls, which I know is not easy for small and medium companies, but we must do this. I've said often there's a reason that PLA, People's Liberation Army weapon systems, look a lot like ours, because from a cyber exfiltration perspective, they've been going after our defense industrial base for many years. And CMMC provides us an ability to basically check and verify that companies are doing what they're supposed to be doing with contractual requirements that have been in their contracts since 2017. But I want you to know from me, as the CIO and somebody who grew up as a kid in South Texas around a lot of small companies and things, we're sensitive to what the burden could be on this, but also we all have to hold each other accountable there. So again, back to my experience as a GEOINTer, change is necessary. So building on that evolution. So one of my formative experiences is being at, it was NEMA at the time. So much was going on there. Now, I would often commute with my wonderful bride, Liz, who's still at NGA as the Africa NGO, and we'd be sitting on 395, coming over there, getting ready to get off of that Navy Yard exit, and I would hear commercials on the radio from our drive time radio, WTOP and elsewhere, from some of your companies here about enterprise IT and cyber across your baseline. I'd be like, who is this for? Who are they talking to? Maybe it was to Mr. Munzel and others, but now it's me. You know, irony of ironies that some of these commercials now are directed at the DOD CIO. But little did I know at the time in the job I would be. But what it did teach me here, and this was in the era when we had retired DNI Clapper at the time, DNGA Clapper, taking us through the evolution of what would become GEOINT, NEMA morphing into NGA, the idea that there weren't just the geospatial side or the imagery side or the collection side, a unified tradecraft. And it was amazing to be part of that. And I am proud to have been at NGA with many of you and working with you during that pivotal period that now resulted in what we do in GEOINT. So, as this got better, and as we formed GEOINT, it made me think about how to do things in the future, about how we become a more agile, effective enterprise at DoD. So there's three areas that I've been very focused on as CIO, which again, I harken back to those roots when I was listening to those IT commercials all those years ago. One is on cloud. I talked about this last year at GEOINT. I am so proud of what we've done on the Joint Warfighting Cloud Capability, or JWCC. We are working with all four of the hyperscaler cloud service providers. We have dozens and dozens and dozens of task orders already in the pipeline. I think we're up around 80 something now, and over 640 million of task orders, and we are moving out with this. We're getting folks accredited up to the secret level and others. We've got unclassed work orders. We are working this across the entire enterprise. JEDI was the right thing at the right time, but we moved past that. But having JWCC now is so effective in what we're doing. And one of the things I'm most proud of is what we're doing at the tactical edge with the Joint Operational Edge Cloud, or JO Cloud. Again, I've talked about this before, but think of a lily pad all the way from CONUS out to the very tactical edge, say in the Western Pacific. You need some sort of infrastructure to get from here to there, say in Hawaii or somewhere else. And what we've done is we've deployed 2 JO Cloud nodes, both in Indo-PACOM, and we have a third globally coming online here soon. Working with the Defense Information System Agency, or DISA, we're moving out on this to make edge cloud capability a reality. Another thing I want to highlight is what we're doing on software modernization. Few things I've been able to get going here in my tenure: the software modernization strategy, which Secretary Hicks signed out, and then the software modernization implementation plan. We are moving DoD from a hardware-defined to a software-defined enterprise. This isn't easy. And Undersecretary LaPlante for ANS just said yesterday, and he's right, we can't forget about the hardware part of the equation as we move to a software-defined enterprise, and he's absolutely right. But we've got to do more on the software front. I'm so honored to work with the leaders at the DoD software factories. I'm so happy to know what we're doing on the implementation of that plan, doing things like clearing obstacles, doing things like moving out on continuous ATO and the evaluation criteria therein, trying to standardize tool capabilities, and so on. This isn't going to be easy, and I know there's a lot of strong emotion, rightfully so, that we need to move faster to be able to do software on the fly updates, just like we're seeing in Ukraine and elsewhere, and having our services move out on this has really done my heart well. But this is something as CIO I'm going to remain very committed to ensuring we move on that. And then finally, another area of evolution at DoD is on 5G and NextG. As of the fiscal year last year, we took over the 5G cross-functional team, or CFT, in DoD CIO. We've had many pilots going on around the nation, and we're going to keep these up. Now, when we think of 5G within the DoD context, there's really 3 lines of effort we lump these into. The first has to do with kind of general purpose use on bases. Now, some people say this is MWR, morale, welfare, and recreation. I think it's more than that. It's a utility. And yeah, it is morale, because I don't want our service members coming off a 12-hour shift, fixing aircraft or working on a tank or something, and having to use 3G or 4G or not having Wi-Fi capabilities to do what they need to do. This gets to retention. This does get to morale. But there's two other major LOEs. We have the bespoke uses for things like maintenance, healthcare, flight line operations. We've had a number of pilots with that. And then finally, tactical uses of 5G. Think about 5G downrange on closed networks. Think about what that does for autonomy, uncrewed vehicles, not only on land, but on sea and elsewhere, and moving out on that. And the final thing I'll note, as we think about Open Radio Access Network, or ORAN standards. Now, I know this audience is more GEOINT, not as much telecom, but this is open architecture 5G, if you take nothing else away from that. And you know what? This puts authoritarian governments back on their heels who do sell closed box, full stack sort of capabilities. The more we can move towards ORAN, and we've worked with the telecom providers and others, and that's where we're going to move out with a software-defined, modular, open source type approach on that. So back to what we evolved in from NEMA to NGA, so are we evolving in what we're doing at DOD. Now, we organized for combat also at NGA. We changed to a combat support agency. We always were, but I think of what Bob Moret's tenure did that carried on through Tish Long and Robert Cardillo. We organized ourselves in a way, and there's a few things I had an opportunity and a privilege to do. I led in 2000, way back then, even before NEMA became NGA, an Iraq stakeholders meeting. I had a great set of managers said, John, do this. We brought all the different parts of NGA or NEMA at the time that were working in Iraq, cartographers, maritime experts, imagery analysts, collection experts, to figure out who was doing what to whom and start to get a sense of team. Then later I became the North Korea issue manager when Director Clapper asked me to do that. I think we'd call them National GEOINT officers now, but I was one of the first ones looking across the whole breadth of what we're doing at NGA. And then finally, I was the first director of the Office of Strategic Operations, going to a portfolio management construct, looking at how we work across the different lines of effort with that NGA. So this taught me two things. You work as a team of teams and you don't relearn lessons, all right? Or if you do have to relearn lessons, it gets expensive. So in my current job now, the team of teams, I work closely, for example, across the interagency on areas like spectrum, electromagnetic spectrum, which is a high-demand commodity. It's finite, but it's also very necessary for our warfighting operations. In the pictures here, if you look at the lower right-hand corner, that's the USS Carney, one of our DDGs that have been in the Red Sea and Eastern Med, intercepting Houthi missiles as well as Iranian missiles. They need spectrum to be able to conduct their operations with their spy radar. We also need that same sort of spectrum to see how we can explore economic opportunity for our telecoms. But by goodness, I want those sailors on the Carney to be able to execute their mission. So I work very closely with the Department of Commerce, FCC, and others as we look at ways forward on something we call the Moonshot program, as we look at dynamic spectrum sharing, where it's not an either or, but we share critical parts of the spectrum and say the lower 3 gigahertz, which is so critical on that. We also work with international partners, just like the GEOINT community does. We're working on something called SABRE, Secret and Below Releasable Environment, that the Department of Air Force is leading. I was just at CENTCOM yesterday, as they're working on the Collaborative Partner Network, or CPN or CPE, that's just what they're working. And then out at INDOPACOM, they have something similar. We've got to be able to share data at speed of mission, and as we talk about combined joint all-domain command and control, that's a mouthful, CJADC2, working with our international partners is so critical to this. And as we look at things like cross-domain solutions and guards, we got to make sure that we protect information, protect our networks, and back to zero trust, but we got to be able to move data and information at speed of mission to enable what the USS Carney and others are doing in the Eastern Med and what we may have to do in the Western Pacific someday. And then finally, I talked about never relearning lessons. One thing I don't talk a lot about, but I want to here for just a moment, is records management. Now, you think about records management, you think about something on NARA or something like that where you have to kind of go through a process. Our records management folks told me something last year that stuck with me. This is about warfighting. This is about not having to relearn something that we've already invested money in, a lesson learned, or something like that. And just last August, I signed out a new Memorandum 8180 TAC 01, which moves it more from an admin responsibility to an IT and data responsibility. So I'm going to challenge all of you in government industry, don't glaze over when people are talking about records management, because it could save lives. Because a study may have been done, an after-action review, or something on TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures, which could keep our service members safe in the future. So lean into it. A few other areas. Space, the final frontier. So I had a chance in a few jobs, for example, to be Director of Source Operations, formerly called C3, overseeing all the collection and throughput, and even back to my National Imagery Analysis course days, learning about orbitologies and collection and things. And now we're all in the space industry in a way here, looking at, I know there's a launch going on at the Cape today, putting up more Starlink satellites, and we're all watching all what's going on there. But this has been my roots as a GEOINTer. You know, there's a few pictures there, there's Delta IV launching. We're going to miss that, so that's always been impressive to watch. There's ADF Colorado there at the bottom left, where I always and continue to feel energized every time I have a chance to visit. And then my colleague, General Saltzman, at the top left. And what I have Salty on there, in addition to working with Admiral Whitworth and those of you on the GEOINT side, I work closely with the Space Force, taking what I learned there as a GEOINTer, and I have responsibility for two major areas: satellite communications and positioning, navigation, and timing. Now in SATCOM, we all love proliferated low Earth orbit, PLEO. And so there's a lot going on with that, but also we need to be mindful. We got to make all this work together. So there's a lot of behind the scenes work I have to do as CIO with my amazing team there on things like enterprise management and control strategies, working with Space Force and Spacecom. How do we stitch together the commercial SATCOM that brings so much to us with the government SATCOM here? And going out to the ground stations, not the imagery ground stations, but the SATCOM ground stations in Hawaii and elsewhere, Nick Tam's PAC and elsewhere, understanding how this is going to work, particularly in a war situation, is critical. As Secretary Austin likes to say, we want to create dilemmas for our adversaries, and having a robust SATCOM constellation is critical for that. And then positioning, navigation, and timing, PNT. GPS remains the absolute gold standard, particularly M code or military code. But it's not just about having the GPS-3 Foxtrot satellites on orbit, the newer ones. It's about having the receivers in the cockpits, on the bridge of the ship, in the armored vehicles. And not only that, having alternative and complementary sources of PNT. And I talked about this last year, but this is an ongoing focus of mine to make sure that when our aviators, our sailors, our Marine soldiers, Guardians, and others are going in, that we're able to fight the way we need to fight and not blinded in terms of how we need to do navigational activities. So that space experience I got at NIAC all those years ago, and down at ADF East in the T block and there in the Horseshoe and everything else a lot of you may remember, has served me well as a CIO. All right, just a few other things here before I sit down and do a little Q&A with Johnny. So as I think about future information technology, again, I hearken back very much to my time at NGA. NGA has always had a reputation for being out at the edge. I think about the thousands of deployers NGA has sent downrange over the years, along with our industry colleagues, whether it's to Iraq, Afghanistan, CJTF, HOA, Haiti, numerous other places. We've always been out at the edge. My wife has been out the edge in Iraq. I was so proud of her at Balad. Many of you I've had the privilege to work with going out and doing that. When I was Office of the Americas Director, circa 2011, we did things domestically, working with Urban Search Force Task Force 1 in Virginia, right over there in Fairfax, bringing them tough books at the time, and so they could do tornado recovery and going into earthquake zones, bringing GEOINT, as Tish Long would say, putting the power of GEOINT in your hands and seeing those urban search and rescue men and women with all their gear on and D-rings and everything, carrying our tough books around, did my heart well. So bringing that forward now to being the DOD CIO, as I think about it, I've got a lot of adjectives on there, and I've used this before about what we need in terms of our information technology for the future at DOD. You see them up there: rugged, flexible, secure, resilient. I won't read all of them, but these are what I'm going to make sure we're holding ourselves accountable for. And how we're doing that, I am honored to tell you that we have a new digital modernization strategy coming out here this summer. We're going to call it Fulcrum, is what the name of it's going to be. And this builds off the 2019 DMS that my predecessor, I think the world of, Dana Deasy, published. And Fulcrum has been led by my super principal deputy CIO, General Retired Leslie Beavers, and being the driving force. And this DMS isn't going to just be bi-functional area. It's going to be cross-cutting as we look at different lines of effort, like providing capabilities that expand the joint force and combined force dominance, modernizing information networks, IT governance, and building the digital workforce. Not just cybersecurity, not just C3, not just cloud. You're going to be hearing more about this. And a key enabler of this has been our Customer Experience Office, or CXO. We've all heard about the fix our computers issues. We took this seriously. And we brought some super experts back in from industry and elsewhere as we get after this and we start to solve hard problems. The pictures you see on there, one of them is a military search and rescue team, but behind them is the James Lovell VA DOD Center in North Chicago, where there were a lot of issues getting the VA and DOD folks there to be able to talk to one another. Working with our CXO team and our VA partners and under Leslie's leadership, we fix this. Now they can work with one another and get data back and forth. And then finally, workforce management. Nothing happens without our people. And I'm so honored what we're doing on things like the Defense Cyber Workforce Framework, or DCWF, making sure we have new programs like the Cyber Academy, which used to be our cyber scholarship program, and many other areas that we're working to make sure that we have the most competitive, the best talent, a workforce that looks like America on everything Johnny just said. I want a diverse, rich workforce, and we're going to look at things like degree requirements like Harry Coker, as the National Cyber Director, is looking at. We're going to look at things like apprenticeships. We're going to try some new things to make sure we have the best workforce we can. And so, as I get ready to close here, I want to let you all know, you GEOINTers out there, particularly early mid-career, you could be me someday. You may be wondering how you're in imagery or a geospatial analyst or collection or IT, whatever. This could be you. Soak this in. You're in the best trade craft in the world to be able to do all manner of things. We have the future USD INS sitting among us here. I know not till you're confirmed. I know the whole thing there. And I think about Dr. Dixon as the PDD&I. I think about Robert Cardillo, who was up at DNI, actually before you were NGA, but after you were an imagery analyst. And so many other things. You were in the right trade craft. So thank you very much, and we're going to ask a couple of questions here. Thank you.
John, I am always in awe of your stage president, your grasp of the issues. So thank you for those observations on how we can propel the GEOINT community forward for mission success. Part of your conversation was about digital modernization, software modernization, and software factories. Many folks in industry face a barrier in terms of being able to ATO their software. They'll do it for one agency or one organization, one network, and then have to start the process all over again for another network. And I know that you're doing a lot of work in regards to ATOs. Can you share your thoughts about the future of ATOs with us?
So authorities to operate have been held up often as a barrier to acceleration, particularly on software development. We have heard that loud and clear, as has our leadership, particularly Deputy Secretary Hicks. So I am pleased to announce here at GEOINT that immediately after I get done talking, we're about to publish new guidance that the Deputy Secretary has signed out that is going to direct reciprocity by default within the Department of Defense. This means we're going to make sure that folks don't have to check each other's homework over and over again. Now, if an authorizing official does have reason, Johnny, to have to, bona fide reasons to have to recheck something, then they're going to be able to do so, but we're going to move to reciprocity by default and start to dynamite through this. And there's going to be a second major aspect of this is going to be if an authorizing official feels like they're being hindered in some way, they can elevate it directly to my office, working with our Chief Information Security Officer. So I saw on LinkedIn as recently as this morning some folks talking about this, and I want to let you all know we've heard you loud and clear on this within the DOD. I'm not going to say this is going to solve every bit of it, but it's going to help us a bit. And meanwhile, Johnny, we're going to be working, I work closely with Dr. Adele Merritt, the IC CIO, as we work with IC DOD reciprocity. But this memo, which will be published here today, will talk about what we're doing within DOD, sir.
Thank you, John. Absolutely. So for the audience, John has a hard stop this morning, but he has graciously agreed to answer a few questions for us. Please continue to send your questions to the website or text them to 22333 with your question in hand. So John, when I look at the small businesses out there, they face a number of hurdles in obtaining contracts with the department. Can you talk about what you're doing to remove some of those barriers to allow small businesses to help with this modernization effort? Innovation, begins with a small business.
Absolutely, Johnny. A lot of that entails working with entities such as the Defense Innovation Unit, or DIU, under Doug Beck, our acquisition and sustainment colleagues, and research and engineering under Honorable Heidi Shue. But what I'm working to as CIO is to ensure that we can do things on the cybersecurity front, like I mentioned, is not to create immutable barriers for that small company, wherever they happen to be, or medium-sized company, and try to get them help from the NSA Cybersecurity Collaboration Center or the Cybercrime Center up at Fort Meade under DC3, Defense Cybercrime Center, to get them some help. That's what I'm working to do. And also the thing we also have to be mindful of, I want to hear about innovation. I want to hear about that good idea, but here's a challenge I would ask my industry counterparts. It's got to scale. We're dealing with a 4 million person enterprise, and of course, working, for example, with our SOCOM colleagues right up I-4 here, they can take smaller examples here and use them within their force. But what I'm looking for as CIO is something that can work across the Department of the Army, the Department of Navy, or Air Force. So those are some of the things I'm engaging with, but also asking some hard questions to make sure we can get those capabilities that are cyber secure and scalable, sir.
Excellent. Thank you, John. John, so yesterday, Lynette Jones talked to us about the great relationship that she has with the ICCIOs. And she also mentioned you as having a great relationship as well. However, there is a barrier, I think, between moving information from DOD systems to IC systems that needs to be addressed. Can you talk about some of the work that you're doing in helping to overcome that hurdle?
Yes, we actually had Adele Merritt and I lead a joint IC DOD CIO council quarterly. We talked about this issue, and Johnny, there's going to not be any silver bullets, but as we do our work, our crediting officials, on the IC it's mainly on the TS side, on DOD, a lot of it is on NIPRNet or SIPR. We've got to make sure that we're able to crosswalk this in the different databases. And a lot of pick and shovel work is going on, is what I can tell you with this, with our CISO teams, to figure out how we can do this. But I'm not going to kid you, this is going to be a longer term effort, but we got to do better. Back to what we're doing in DOD, we shouldn't have to recheck homework constantly because it creates drag on the system, sir.
Excellent. And John, I know that our time is up, but could you answer one more question for me? So can you cite some examples of successful implementation of industry solutions to meet DoD requirements?
I think the biggest one, Johnny, is with Joint Warfighting Cloud Capability is one I would bring, where we have 4 world-class vendors bringing cloud capability at scale to include at the tactical edge. That's just one, and there's many I could go through with software, with cybersecurity, and C3, but JWCC is the one that I am so proud of that's bringing real-world impacts to the Joint Force.
Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable John Sherman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.